God has really just changed me and grown me, and I feel called to be here. I feel like I'm making a difference in the lives of my students. It just feels like this was the next step in God's plan for my life. And I tell people a lot that sometimes it feels like audio adrenaline was really just a thing that led to this. Like I've got so much real ministry happening now, and audio adrenaline enabled this.
You are listening to the Christian Music Archive podcast, part of the New Release Today podcast network. I'm your host, Dave Maurer. Each week, I share stories about Christ, community, and music, chatting with musical guests who you will find listed on the pages of the Christian Music Archive. There are thousands of creative men and women who have helped shape the soundtrack of the Christian faith, and we get to hear their stories, learn about how Christ has made a difference in their life, and hopefully along the way, we'll learn how we can be a better part of our community. Hello, friends. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the podcast. Today's episode features one of the founding members of one of the 90s biggest CCM rock bands. And like so many of these episodes, I had a blast talking with today's guest, and I think you're going to like this episode too. If you've listened to the past 3 or 4 episodes, you'll remember that the Christian Music Archive website has to undergo a fairly significant upgrade in order to stay on the web. All last month, we have been praying about how we could raise the funds needed to do this project, and we felt led that we should continue pushing forward with this program. As a result, I've started a campaign to raise the funds needed to help keep us alive, and I need your help to do it. So I've got 2 ways that you can help. One is through a direct one-time or recurring donation, and the other is on our Patreon page. I'm asking you to chip in a couple of dollars to help make sure that we are able to pay the upgrade fees needed, and some of you have already responded. A great big thanks to Matt, David, and Melissa for your generosity to help keep the archive up and running. And if every person listening to this podcast each month were to contribute just a couple of dollars, we'd be able to cover the entire upgrade costs by the end of October. So, I'm personally inviting you to prayerfully consider if you would join and keep the Christian Music Archive alive. To learn more or to provide a contribution, hop on over to christianmusicarchive.com/donate. There, you can join our Patreon page or do that direct contribution we were talking about. Either way, your donation at christianmusicarchive.com/donate will help cover the costs of keeping the archive up and running. Thanks in advance for your continued encouragement and support, and I hope to see you all over at christianmusicarchive.com/donate. Before our conversation today, I want to tell you about another exciting Mercy Inc. program. Starfish Kids is a child sponsorship and development program in the northern part of Haiti. Students in 30 schools are sponsored each month for $25 a month. That money pays for tuition and books so that the students can get a Christian education. And in addition to school, students are also attending church, and a lot of times the entire family will attend too. That $25 a month contribution also helps pay to train and retain teachers. Now this really surprised me. A well-trained teacher in Haiti makes about 1,800 Haitian goud a month. That's about $20 a month in U.S. currency. That's just crazy. Starfish Kids would love to support and train more kids and add additional schools to the ones they're already working with. I'd like to encourage you to sponsor a girl or a boy today through the great work of Starfish Kids. And you can learn more by visiting mercycompassion.org and clicking on the child sponsorship link. That's mercycompassion.org, and thanks for making a difference for a child today. Back in the 1990s, I promoted a lot of concerts in Oregon and Washington. I did a short 3-leg tour with Audio Adrenaline one year and had a great time with the guys. One of my most memorable shows was in a college gymnasium in eastern Washington. The opening band was playing on stage, and the Audio Adrenaline guys and I were behind the stage playing football. I often laugh about that story, thinking about their big radio hit, Big Big House, where we can play football. That was also the concert where the police chief of that small town came in and turned off the power to the concert exactly at 10 o'clock because the town had a sound ordinance and the band was definitely not following that rule. Anyway, I think that year was the last tour that Barry Blair was playing guitars for Audio Adrenaline. And shortly after that tour, he just up and disappeared. Well, whatever happened to Barry Blair? Well, today you and I are going to find out because all the way from Wilmore, Kentucky, I'm chatting with the original guitarist for Audio Adrenaline, Barry Blair. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello.
Welcome.
Glad to be here.
Barry is sitting in a pretty cool studio. In fact, of all of my guests, I think he's sitting in probably the coolest studio of anybody. And we'll hear a little bit about that, I'm sure. So people who are credit readers or people who are from the 80s know you as a founding member of a small little band called Audio Adrenaline.
Yes.
Yeah. And you were the guitar player for what, about 5-6 years? Is that right?
Yeah. So, we met as freshmen in college. And so we played together all through college. And then after we signed our deal, 5 more years. So I was with those guys for really 10 years, if you count college.
Sure.
5 years professionally.
Well, and then everybody was wondering, wait a minute, why did Barry leave?
Yeah.
Is that something you could talk about?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. There's road burnout,
Mm-hmm.
and there's just, for me, there was kind of I began to be more interested in the creation of the music and less interested in performing live.
Yeah.
And so studio was really fascinating to me and fun. I got an opportunity to produce another band and, just enjoyed that so much that I was like, maybe I want to try my hand at this,
Yeah.
So I really left to pursue production. But it was also kind of the combination of that and just a little bit of burnout from a constant touring and those sorts of things.
Well, but you still, even though you were no longer part of the band, and you were still all over the credits of later albums.
Yeah, we were still, we remained good friends.
Yeah.
There were no hard feelings. We had our disagreements like every band does.
If you don't, are you a band?
No, I'm not sure. That's a good question. All in all, though, I departed with good relationships. I'm thankful for that. But I went ahead and, they called me back and said, we're going to be going back in the studio to work on the next album. Do you have any song ideas? Mm-hmm. And so I pitched them an idea that I had, and it ended up being the title cut on Some Kind of Zombie.
Yeah.
And, so we continued to work together in different ways like that.
Do you hang out with the guys at all, or do you see them at all anymore these days?
Yeah, at this point, it's been a couple of years. But Mark was actually up here in Kentucky a couple of years ago, and we got to spend some time together. Actually, it was as he was writing his book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was quite a book, and I'm hoping to get Mark on as a guest to talk about that because he's got quite a story. But we're talking about Barry right now. So, well, let's talk a little bit because the first time that I saw your production outside of Audio A was on a band called Bleach, and they were a rock band that you helped produce their first record, right?
Yeah. So the connection there is really interesting. When we were all in college, I was giving guitar lessons.
Okay.
And there was a professor's son. So he was in high school or maybe even started in junior high, maybe 8th grade. I started giving him guitar lessons. And so 5 or 6 or 7 years later, we're out on tour and he is now in college. Uh-huh. And he comes to an Audio Adrenaline show and he sees me after the show and says, "Hey, I'm in a band now. Would you want to come produce our band?" And so I loved the idea. I was like, yeah, I'd love to do that. So I go back up to Kentucky and go to Kentucky Christian where they were. And we found a studio and we went in and produced a demo. So that was my first time actually producing, and they're new at it too. We're just a bunch of people all new at what we're doing, really. I had the experience of, making the Audio Adrenaline records before I was in the band, but producing's a whole different, thing. But that was my first experience. And I said, I really liked what they were doing. I liked their music. And so I said, I can't promise you anything, but I will take this back to the record label and I'll play it for them and we'll see what they say. I didn't expect anything. I wasn't going to get my hopes up, but I played it for Eddie DeGarmo and Dan Brock at Forefront and they just loved it. I mean, within 6 months, the band was signed and I was producing the record. So that was how I got into producing, and that's really what sort of lit the fire for me to say, maybe I just want to try this more.
Yeah, and so from then you went on and you did, and say I wrote some down, Considering Lily, Addison Road, Medford Drive, J.J.
Yes.
Weeks. So did you go out and seek these guys out, or did they come looking for you?
It was sometimes either or.
Yeah.
And a lot of those, so some of the stuff I did was for Forefront. I produced a few records for Forefront after Bleach. But a lot of them were indie bands at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So like I produced Addison Road before they were signed.
Okay.
And I believe they found me. There were others where I would kind of go hunting, scouring the internet, looking for a good band.
Yeah.
And if I found something I really liked, I would just pitch myself. Here's
Mm-hmm.
what I've done, and I'm a producer. And if you need a producer, I'd love to talk. And some of the bands I worked with, came about that way.
Well, it's been fun for me to be able to. I'm a huge credit reader. Obviously, on my website, you see that a lot of credits documented there. But it's fun for me to see kind of the progression of this person helped this person help this person, and how there's really this community in the music industry that's like, this begets this, and if everything traces back to Larry Norman, I think. But anyway. So that's been fun for me to watch, and then to even now listen now, and you're still recording stuff, you're still producing stuff.
Yeah. I kind of, the producing thing sort of felt like it ran its course, and I was looking for the next thing, and I ended up deciding to go back and get my master's degree and be a college professor.
Oh.
And it's the funny thing is, if there's an old Audio Adrenaline video, long form video, where we're all talking about each other, and Bob, our keyboard player at the time, said, I think Barry would make a good professor someday. And I thought at the time, that'll never happen. I'll never be a professor, but I am, and I really do love it. Feel like God's called me here. But now that I'm doing that, I kind of all of a sudden felt free to just do whatever I wanted musically again.
Mm-hmm.
Music wasn't about trying to pay the bills. It wasn't about trying to have to do a certain thing to build a career. So it was just, well, what would I enjoy doing? And it's really freeing to just be back to approaching it like that.
Well, isn't that kind of why most of us get into music in the first place?
Yes.
Is just to express something inside and not necessarily make it a living.
Absolutely. And then it's easy to lose that along the way. It's really easy to just lose sight of that, get caught up in the, you do have to think of it as a business.
Sure.
And you have to focus on that part of it. And it's really easy to just kind of forget why did I start doing this in the first place? So that really brought me back a lot of joy to just get back to making music the way I did in college.
Yeah.
Just because I love doing it for no other reason,
Well, that's been interesting talking to some old Jesus music people and to some of these folks who are just, like you said, making music for the joy of what they're experiencing inside. And then the business piece gets in, and the business piece is necessary to take your stuff to the masses. Do you have a word of advice for folks who are saying, I love this, but I want to make it a career? Where's that balance? What kind of things do you tell, well, probably your students, but the listening audience, how do you find that?
Yeah, that is a tough thing to balance. And I probably honestly, and I think I was this way as a college student too, is you're a little bit of an idealist. Like,
sure,
I'm not going to worry about the business. I'm going to do whatever I want, and it's a little bit maybe egotistical or self-centered. And so there's a part of you that has to learn, hey, if I want to succeed, I may have to, change some things in order to find success. And I honestly, for me in my journey, that was a process of kind of learning humility of like, hey, this is not all about me. It's not all about what I want.
Yeah.
God used that to humble me and help me not be so, focused on myself.
Yeah.
But on the other side of it, like you're saying, you got to keep that passion and do it from your heart where it's real. In my experience, it was really easy to lose that. And I think everybody has different experiences, but we went through a couple of albums worth of, trying to find ourselves after we had been sort of made into something that we never should have been in the first
Right.
place.
Right.
And so that was that's its own story.
Well,
But,
and you hear artists talk all the time about how the label wanted me to be something different, or they want me to be the next X band, whatever that band is, because
Yeah.
that's a money sign for the business, and the record label is a business, and they've got mouths to feed, just like the band has mouths to feed. So
That's right.
so for an up and coming, and I think it's a little different today with the ease of the internet and how everybody can just pretty much go, they can plug their song on Spotify or whatever, but there's still a benefit of the machine, if you will, in a business. So
Yes.
as somebody starting out, how do you counsel them to say, well, what's more important, the machine or the integrity? And integrity may be the wrong word, but you know what I mean,
Right.
the ability to be yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've more and more become a believer that, your best chance of success is to follow your heart creatively,
Mm-hmm.
um, that's where you find originality, is when you just kind of follow your instinct and let that take you where it goes. Um, but it's always balanced with those kind of the sort of marketing and business questions of, you have to step back from your song and say, is this really a good song? I mean, is it really a
Right.
good song, or do I just think it's a good song? And could it be better if I change some things, because maybe I just want to keep it this way again, so I'm keeping, because I want it to be all mine,
Yeah.
right? I don't want to be that way. I don't want to, you don't want to put out subpar work because you're unwilling to critique yourself or be critiqued by someone else.
Yeah.
So there's always that balance. But yeah, I fall back to, even in that, I still want to just create stuff I like.
Yeah.
And like the most awesome thing is when you create something you like or you love, and you don't know, you're kind of like, man, I don't know if people are going to like it. Maybe they're going to hate it, but I really hope they like it too.
Yeah.
And then if they do, you got this connection, you have
Yeah.
this kind of spiritual connection that happens because, hey, I created that kind of just from my heart, and people liked it.
Yeah.
That's a cool thing.
Well, and for me, I think I try to encourage people to say, what is my audience? Is this an audience of, I just have an itch and I want to make a song? Is
Right.
it, this is a worship song that I want my church to sing? Is
Right.
it, I'm trying to make a living, so I need as many people to buy it as possible so I can feed the kids?
Right.
And so that's a vital part too.
Yeah. Yeah. All of that comes into it. And as when I was in the band and young, I was an idealist, and I was very resistant to that. I was resistant to doing anything just because it would help sell, I think that's sort of an artistic idealist, maybe you'd say. I'm looking for the right word, but, and, now I look back on it and go, well, if people hadn't pushed me that direction, I probably wouldn't be successful,
Yeah.
And for a band, even within the band, at least in our band, you had guys who leaned more that way. Hey, I just want to do whatever's going to help us reach the most people.
Mm-hmm.
And other people saying, yeah, but I want to love our music. I want it to be authentic.
Yeah.
And really, you want to try to do both.
Yeah.
As best as you can, you want to try to achieve both.
Yeah. Well, while we're talking about music, because I want to get to a little bit of some of the other things that we talked about, but you have just released a really, really cool version of Down in the Lowlands.
Yeah.
The Charlie Peacock penned tune, made popular probably by Russ Taff.
Yep.
Talk a little bit about that. And then you also have a really cool blues version of Reckless Love, that great worship song. So you're still making stuff, but now this is stuff you love. Talk about that process.
Yeah, Reckless Love came first. And I'd been wanting to do something, kind of my own release. I'm not a vocalist. So, I arrange music and I create guitar parts and I can put all that together, but I got to have somebody to sing it. That's not what I do. So, but the idea came to me at church when we were singing Reckless Love, and I just thought this song would be a great rock song.
Yeah.
And so And I really kind of just heard it in my head how I wanted it to be right away. So I demoed it, and then I played that for a friend of mine who was in a band I produced, Jeremy Zeller. Was in a band called Poor Man's Riches, and I produced a record for them. So we've known each other for years.
Yeah.
He's got a great rock voice, and he liked it. So I was like, hey, do you want to sing this?
Before I spoke a word, you were singing over me. You have been so, so good to me. Before I took a breath, you breathed your life in me. You have been so, so kind to me. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Oh, it chases me down, fights till I'm found, and leaves the 99. I couldn't earn it, and I don't deserve it. Still, you give yourself away. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God.
So that one just came together that way very organically. And then I was wanting to follow it up with something else. Still kind of thinking maybe about another worship song. But I've always loved that song, Down in the Lowlands,
yeah.
ever since the Russ Taff version. And I heard the Russ Taff version before Charlie Peacock. Just that's who I knew. But then of course Charlie, everybody knows Charlie as just this amazing writer,
Yeah.
great producer and all that. But that song has always stuck with me. And again, I think I was just driving in my car when the idea came to me that this song would be really cool as a heavy rock song, hard rock song. And I kind of had the idea, kind of knew how I wanted it to feel, but I went in the studio. I added kind of like a guitar riff to it that wasn't there originally.
Okay.
And that was, a little bit of time of just sitting in the studio and kind of playing around till it came out.
The water is up to my neck, and I'm sinking in the deep. There is no foothold to find anywhere. I'm very worn out from calling for help. My throat is hoarse and dry as a bone. My eyes, they fail me from looking for you. I'm looking for you. I'm down in the lowlands where the water is deep. Hear my cry, hear my shout, save me, save me. Down in the lowlands where the water is deep. Hear my cry, hear my shout, save me, save me. Could I be drowned? Have I failed to be heard by the only one who can save me? Show me your mercy and touch me again. Please lift me up above where I am. My eyes, they fail me from looking for you. My eyes, they fail me from looking for you. I'm looking for you. Yeah! 'Cause I'm down in the lowlands where the water is deep. Hear my cry, hear my shout, save me, save me. Down in the lowlands where the water is deep. Hear my cry, hear my shout, save me, save me. fail me from looking for you. I'm looking for you. 'Cause I'm down in the lowlands where the water is deep. Hear my cry, hear my shout, save me, save me. Down in the lowlands where the water is deep. Hear my cry, hear my shout, save me, save me.
But I knew what I wanted it to feel like, even just as I was imagining it. I love that song.
Yeah. This is kind of an aside. Have you cranked up the Russ Taff version? I did it when I first had my CD, and right at the very beginning, while the music, because it kind of fades in, you hear Russ say, "Are you recording this?" And it's really
never
way,
heard
way
that.
back in the mix. I mean, it's clear back in the mix, but it's one of those
Wow.
things that's like, that's a little Easter egg that I like to remember.
I'm going to have to look for that. I've never heard that, but I love little hidden things like that. Yeah.
It's like
Those are great.
that had to be something somebody missed in
Yeah.
the edit.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and then you also have a really cool Christmas album, a real cool kind of acoustic guitar Christmas album too. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. Thank you. I did that one. I got that one's probably like 14 years old now. I think I
Oh,
did
wow.
it in about 2008.
Okay.
And I was producing other bands still, but I wasn't really releasing anything of my own. And so it was really kind of just a labor of love. You know?
Yeah.
I'm just going to hole up in the studio and arrange all these old Christmas songs on guitar. And I believe when I first released it, think about 2008, things were so different then.
Yeah.
I think I first just like printed a couple of hundred CDs. And that's
Yeah.
all it was, and then I ended up putting it on iTunes and then years later putting it on Spotify.
Yeah.
So
Well, I have to admit,
It's
I was
there.
listening to Christmas in August today because I listened to some of that album before our conversation. Well, you alluded to earlier that after kind of the production thing, you worked with Bleach and some of these other bands. You kind of went back to school, got a
Yeah.
master's degree, and then now we're talking to you at a school where you're now a professor.
I'm a professor. Yes.
So talk about how that transition happened. How did you get hooked up? Let's see. You're at
Asbury University. Yeah. So, I've known about Asbury for a long time. Of course, it's in the same town where they used to have the Ichthus Festival,
Okay.
Wilmore, Kentucky.
Isn't
So
it called the Asbury Theological Seminary?
There's both.
Okay.
So there's a university and a seminary.
Gotcha. Okay.
And I'm at the university. So that's how I first ever heard of Asbury, was because of the connection to Ichthus. And then I remember hearing years and years ago that they had a really great media program. And back then it was like television, probably broadcast journalism, that
Sure.
kind of thing. But there was some people who came out of that program that worked on some of our music videos or something. So even back in the Audio Adrenaline days, I remember people saying, "Man, Asbury's a great school."
Yeah.
So I sort of had that impression of it, and I had, the producing thing. I really kind of felt like it had run its course. That's how music careers are. They kind of peak and valley, and I felt like I wasn't going to get any farther with it than I had. And at first that was sort of a hard experience. Like, okay, what
Yeah.
am I going to do next?
Yeah.
I'm not sure what I'm going to do with my life next. Feeling a little bit of that sort of not knowing what was next. And I hadn't really thought about being a professor, and I didn't want to go back to grad school. It was not something that was on my radar. But my wife encouraged me to call some different schools. And really what I was looking for was not a professor job, but more of a, maybe the house engineer in a studio at a different school. And I knew Asbury had media. So I contacted them. The head of the media department, Jim Owens, emailed me back within an hour or two.
Oh, wow.
And he said, we have a media program and we're going to add audio production and we need an audio professor, but you'd have to get a master's degree. And he said the best thing to get would be an MFA, Masters of Fine Arts,
Okay.
in audio or in recording or something like that. So that sort of, sparked my interest a little bit. And I started Googling and where can I find an MFA in recording, Turns out the only one I could find in the whole United States was 30 minutes from my house
Oh, wow.
at Middle Tennessee State University down in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, and I lived in Spring Hill, Tennessee. So about 30 minutes away. I went and visited the college, and it was just an amazing college, amazing, program. That was really, so it just, all the pieces were coming together. It felt like God was orchestrating
Absolutely.
this.
Yeah.
And Asbury, I adjuncted at Asbury while I was doing grad school. I would drive back and forth, and they paid for a lot of my grad school.
Very
and then
cool.
I had a full-time job waiting for me when I graduated. So
Oh, very cool.
it couldn't have been more smooth. It was God's hand the whole way. And I'll add to that, like, I didn't know if I would love teaching. I'm a bit of an introvert. So I didn't know if I would love standing up in front of a class and talking, and God has really just changed me and grown me. And I feel called to be here. I feel like I'm making a difference in the lives of, my students, all of that kind of thing. It just feels like this was the next step in God's plan for my life,
Yeah.
And I tell people a lot that sometimes it feels like audio adrenaline was really just a thing that led to this,
Yeah. Yeah.
like I've got so much real ministry happening now, and audio adrenaline enabled this,
Yeah.
so there's kind of an interesting twist to that.
Well, I always I look back over my own life and see the progression of how God brought me through this experience, which made it possible for me to go through experience B, C, D, E, all the way down the road, which I like to remind people. In fact, I'm needing to remind myself that sometimes, is that whatever I'm going through right now is the training ground for the next chapter, whenever that is. It might be tomorrow, it might be 10 years from now. But
That's
that
right.
God is purposefully putting you in places so that you can do exactly what he needs you to do later on down the road.
I believe that wholeheartedly. Yeah. And I think I've witnessed it in my own life.
Well, I have two branches of questioning that I want to go around this. So let's talk about your normal day. So as a professor, we think, at least way back when I was in school, you sit down in class and you're taking notes and somebody's standing up on the chalkboard or, whatever, writing down things. But you're talking audio production. That's a little bit harder to do on a chalkboard or a whiteboard or whatever they are.
Yes,
what does that look like
is.
for you?
Yeah, it's less of that, although there's some of that, but it's more of, we're in a recording studio. We have sessions. We produce a song over the course of the semester. People take turns getting up at the board and engineering. We talk about the process. They experience the process. We talk about the decisions that just, really thousands of decisions that happen in a production. We talk about, things like mic technique and how to get good sounds, how to do the recording really well, those kinds of things. So it's a lot more hands-on than what you might think of as the typical lecture kind of setting. There's a technical side of it, a little bit of a science side of it, and that stuff is more lecture and more, you take notes and you take the test and you show me that you understand these concepts, but then combine that with the hands-on practical experience of just actually recording.
Yeah.
And it is something that, you learn it the best by just doing it a whole lot. The more you do it, the better you get at it.
Well, and as technology is changing, there's always something to learn, right?
Yes. Even for me, I have to keep up with all the changes in technology that are happening so fast.
Yeah, I just recently started running sound at church after a number of years of not doing sound, and had to learn the whole difference between a digital board and an analog board.
Yes.
And the fact that I don't have all of my trim knobs and all of my gain and EQ for every channel. I have to punch a button to get this channel.
Right. I'm with you there. And I went through that transition. The funny thing is, my students who are 19 and 20 years old.
Right. This is all they know.
They don't, like there is no analog board option. It's digital boards is all they've ever known, and software. They don't know analog tape, they only know software.
When you talk about a chunk on the cutting room floor, they have no clue what that means.
Nope. Lots of things have changed, and a lot of it for the better, I have to remember that they grew up in an entirely different world of technology than I grew up in.
I had a conversation, it's been about 6 months ago or so. I don't know if you remember Paul Clark. He was an old Jesus
Yeah.
music guy. And he had a young guy that he was teaching some recording skills to, and they were listening to one of his albums. How did you get that sound? Well, because he was trying to emulate it, on the digital. Well, we had a toolbox full of tools, and we dumped it on the piano so that as we played the strings, it vibrated all those tools on the piano strings. How would
That's
I do?
awesome.
How would I do that electronically? He says, I don't think you can.
Right.
Well, the other thing, I love hearing people's testimony. And as you've talked several times about God moving in your life. And it's very obvious that God is important in the school that you've chosen to teach at and so forth. Let's talk a little bit about your testimony. How did you come to know Christ? And when did it become your own? I always like to ask, when did it become your own and not what mom and dad taught you?
Right. Well, I did grow up, my parents were Christian and grew up going to church my whole life. So I always did believe in God and believe in Jesus. But yeah, like you're saying, that point where it becomes more your own and more real to you. But I'll start with probably about 12 years old up through high school. I had a youth pastor that was just a huge impact on me, both spiritually in that process of uncovering what it all means really, and not just believing it because that's what I was taught, And then the other thing that he did was he introduced me to CCM music, He introduced me to Petra and DeGarmo and Key and all of these bands. That's what turned me onto it. So right there at about 15 years old, those two things were happening at the same time. It was like my love for the Lord was growing, maturing, and my love for music. And I had found this Christian music that was so important to me in my formation, and so it just came together like, this is what I want to do. This is what I'm supposed to do, And I felt like it was a calling. And I really believed it was going to happen. And it was not in an egotistical way, in a kind of a naive way. I just believed this is going to happen.
So did you hear something specific that says you're going to be doing music? I mean, what was that process like?
I didn't hear God speak to me in a voice, but I as all of that was happening and I'm just taking all this in, and I'm learning to play guitar, and I'm learning Petra songs, and also, going to church and youth group, and my faith is growing. And then when it just all came together in my mind, like, this is what I want to do, I felt like God gave me that thought, I felt like God planted that idea that this is what I'm going to do. So that was an important moment in my life. And then really, I would say my 4 years of Bible college was a lot of that sort of it becoming my own, not just because my parents believed it and taught me, but why do I really believe this, And really learning and becoming, what we say of, it has to be a relationship with Jesus, right? It's not just about the words. It's not just about believing something. It's about having a relationship with this person, Jesus. That started to happen and become real for me, I think, even more so in college, And then the maturing process is lifelong,
Right.
In some ways, I look back and some of the things about Audio Adrenaline that were difficult for me that's how God used that to make me, more like him now. Yeah. And I can see, you look back and you can see those things, and you just really do see God's hand in the whole process. So that's kind of maybe in a nutshell.
Can you give an example of one of those times? I'm kind of going this way because one of the things that my heart's been really broken recently is the number of Christian musicians, or even just Christians in general, who are going through this crisis of faith and are trying to, I think the word people throw around is deconstruction, and they're trying to, trying to define, what does God look like and how does it fit into a box, or is it outside the box, or maybe it's not even here, it's over. That's a process that I think we all go through in our spiritual walk, but it looks different for everybody. And So I would be real curious if you could even just think of one experience or one kind of thing that helped you know, yeah, I am wrestling with this, and this is how it pointed me back to Jesus.
A big part of it for me in those early days of the band, I think, come back to the whole wrestling with ego and self, love of self, putting myself first versus putting God first. I really had a hard time with that, if I didn't like the song or if I didn't like the music. And honestly, I had to look back at it and I say, but really, that was because that was a bit selfish. It was a bit self-centered,
Yeah.
I wasn't focused on what God could do through us. I was more focused on what I wasn't getting that I wanted, to be able to play guitar in a certain style or to be able to have a certain tone, or somebody on, the producer on the record asks me to change a part or change a tone. Those kind of things would really, they would bother me more than they should,
Yeah.
And now when I look back at it, I do know that God, that was a humbling process.
Yeah.
And I do think that I came out of it better, that the Lord made me more like him, by humbling me through some of those things of kind of like, hey, I don't always get my way.
Yeah.
I don't always get what I want. And if my focus is on, ministry, how can God use us? Then those things, they wouldn't be as important, right? I could be okay with that. I could take a back seat and say, it's okay if I don't get everything the way I want, because God's using us, and that's what really matters the most.
Yeah.
Some of that stuff, I'll be really honest, some of that stuff I didn't learn until I left the band, and then I look back and I see how I wasn't as mature as I should have been in that time,
Yeah.
But then God brings about the change,
Yeah.
and makes you more into his image. That's probably a struggle of almost every musician. And in a way, it comes from kind of from insecurity than from pride. Kind of comes from like wanting recognition or acknowledgement, and I think we all do in some ways. But being able to submit that to God's will first, right?
Yeah.
Is where the right position of your heart lies.
You said something in your story that and this is kind of just a fun tidbit. So you were introduced to Garmo and Key, and then you grow up, join a band, and now you're actually working with Eddie DeGarmo. That's got to be kind of surreal.
Yes, that was because I did. They were the first Christian concert I ever saw at 13 years old, was DeGarmo and Key, and then many times after that, probably bought every album all the way through high school and college. And then we get signed, and I knew at first, I already knew that Eddie had some part in the label.
Yeah.
And then the first time he was like actually in the office, you're just a little starstruck. My goodness, that's Eddie DeGarmo.
Yeah.
Like, I'm standing here in my record label office with Eddie DeGarmo. Yeah, I totally had that. And then when I got to produce Bleach, he's who I took it to. He's who signed him. He's who offered me the chance to produce it. And so now, even beyond the band, I was kind of one-on-one working with Eddie. And I really now still, I consider Eddie kind of a mentor,
Oh, sure.
Someone that I learned from and looked up to, and, am grateful for just the opportunities that he gave me.
I've had a couple of times now. In fact, you probably don't remember because you saw 1,000,001 promoters, but I promoted a few shows with you out here in the Northwest and saw you guys out here. And for me, that was one of those things. It's like, I know these guys are just normal people. I know they're just normal guys, but I've always kind of looked up to them. So that's that balance of, professionalism, and yet you guys do something that I really appreciate. So yeah, I can only imagine what that first meeting was like when you were there.
Oh yeah, it was surreal. Another one was we did this acoustic set at the Ryman Auditorium, and Amy Grant was there. And she was the queen of CCM. I mean, and of course I had known her music and all that, so it was surreal to have her in the audience while we were performing. I got lots of great stories like that.
So you've talked a lot about some really, really cool things, the way God transformed you, the way you got to meet one of your idols and work with them. Idols is the wrong term. Somebody you looked up to.
Yeah.
Your adoption experience. I always enjoy hearing people's, when they look back over their life and go, oh my goodness, I can't believe I got to do fill in the blank.
Yeah.
Between music and personal and relationship with Jesus and all of those different things, what's your pinch me moment that's, oh my goodness?
Okay. Well, from a musical perspective, the moments that stick out to me, when we were newly signed and really no one knew us yet.
Right.
I got to go do some shows with DC Talk.
Mm.
And so I had never played in front of more than a few hundred people. And I was on stage at Disney World with DC Talk, right in front of Cinderella's castle, people down Main Street as far as you could see. And not only am I on stage with DC Talk, but the bass player is Jackie Street.
Oh my
Russ
gosh.
Taft's bass player, who I had just loved for years. It was like, I'm 23 years old, and I've just, signed a record deal, and now I'm standing on a stage at Disney World with Jackie Street, playing for DC Talk. That was surreal, and I'll never forget that.
Oh, wow.
And then Audio Adrenaline, we went back to Disney World and played there too. And those are memorable experiences. But then you also have, before we were Audio Adrenaline, we were going around to church camps, right? Playing for 100 kids at a church camp and actually spending the week with them.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember impacting lives, I remember some of those times when you just, you knew you were making a difference on a deeper level than just coming in and doing your music.
Yeah. And
signing an autograph and leaving or whatever. So those are some great memories. That's the music stuff, probably. I mean, spiritually, my kid's baptism, you can't get any better than that. I baptized both of my older two kids.
Wow.
Myself. That was a great experience, memorable thing.
Yeah.
And my own baptism when I was young. Those are things that are important to me. Meeting my wife for the first time. I guess people wonder about someone who's been in a band or had that sort of celebrity kind of life. But really, the big moments are the same.
Mm-hmm.
It's thinking about when you met your wife.
Yeah.
It's thinking about when your kids were born.
Well, Barry, one of the things we do every Saturday is we send out a prayer newsletter, and we post to our social medias prayer requests for artists and people who have been and who are making music. What specifically can we be praying for you in the weeks and months ahead?
I would say right now, especially being on a college campus, every college is dealing with how do we address COVID. Some people want to wear masks. Some people don't want to wear masks. Yeah. Some people want to get the vaccine. Some people don't want to get the vaccine. There's so much. It feels like it's all over our country.
Yeah.
But even on our campus, it feels like there's so much division. And I've just personally been praying for unity on our campus, for unity in our churches, for unity in our country, where we have different points of view on all kinds of things, but we have to be able to come together above that as brothers and sisters in Christ, and love each other and be willing to give up our wants for someone else's needs, all those kind of things, So I'm praying for that for our campus. And I guess I would ask that you guys pray for me to the extent that I'm kind of a leader here, that I will be wise and kind, just handle all that with grace.
As a follower of Christ, I like looking back over my life and seeing how God has prepared me for what I'm doing now. I've had some interesting jobs that, at the time, seemed like just a means to put food on the table for me and my family. But in hindsight, I realized that I learned things that prepared me for my next job. And the job I have today is a direct result of the variety of experiences I've had, both in jobs and throughout my life. Barry talked about that as his experience too. If you would have told 13-year-old Barry that he would have been a college professor, he would have stated emphatically that, no, I'm going to be a rock star. But his experiences with audiodrenaline and with other life situations prepared him to be the professor that he is today and helping shape young lives into the people God wants them to be. And it wasn't just the band either. It was his newfound interest in producing. It was the fact that the degree he wanted was offered at just one school, and that was just 30 minutes from his home. I am a firm believer that if we follow the interests God gives us, He will take us to places that, in the beginning, we would have said, "No way, I'm not doing that." But each step with Christ helps shape us into the women and men God can use. And of course, the other part of that is truly seeking after what God wants us to do. There is a popular phrase that talks about God giving us the desires of our hearts. Now, I don't think that always means that whatever we want, God is going to give us. But rather, I think God places into our lives interests and experiences that shape what we like to do. He gives us talents and skills that are personally fulfilling because He plans to use us in ways that we could never have imagined. But He knows we need to experience different aspects of life, and so He helps shape our interests and our desires. Jeremiah 29:11 is a favorite verse of mine. It says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." Or how about Psalm 37:23 and 24? That one says, "The Lord directs the steps of the godly. He delights in every detail of their lives. Though they stumble, they will never fall, for the Lord holds them by their hand." What might God be preparing for you to do today? What situations are you going through that are training grounds for where God wants you tomorrow, or next month, or even next year? Maybe He's leading you to a new career. Maybe He wants to take you on a short-term mission trip. Or maybe He's asking you to consider adopting a child. Whatever His plan is for you, remember that the experiences, jobs, and situations you are going through right now are part of the training plan that God has for you. The things you are interested in are also part of that same plan. Speaking of adoption, we ran out of time in this episode to share all of the conversation I had with Barry. He and his wife Dawn have adopted a little girl from Ethiopia, and it is another great story of how God prepared their hearts through a series of experiences and relationships to adopt their daughter Helen. If you'd like to hear that conversation, head over to patreon.com/ccmexchange and look for the Barry Blair Aftercast, and we'll put that link in the show notes to this episode. As always, thanks for joining me for this conversation today. I am grateful that we get to spend this time together each week hearing stories of God's amazing faithfulness. As a regular listener to this podcast, would you mind taking a few minutes and rating it on your favorite podcast app? Reviews and ratings really help spread the word so that other folks can hear about these great conversations. And if you have comments or questions for me, please feel free to drop me a message on any of the social media platforms. You can find me on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and Patreon by searching for @CCMExchange. Or you can always drop me an email on the website christianmusicarchive.com. I'm really looking forward to our time together next week when I have another great conversation with one of the musicians you'll find on the pages of the Christian Music Archive. So until then, remember this: God loves you. In fact, He's crazy about you.